Wow. Um, I I hadn't watched that for a little while. That is an amazing piece of work, and that's only the beginning of a series that has 8 parts to it. In the chat, you'll be able to find a link to information on how to get access to the whole series, as well as a link to the discussion guide that can be downloaded. So at this point, I would like to introduce you to our 2 moderators for the discussion. John Pace spent more than 30 years incarcerated in the Pennsylvania prison system, and John has worked with us for the past 5 years. Tyrone Wirtz, who spent 37 years in Graterford Prison, has worked with us since his commutation from a life sentence 10 years ago. John will be moderating the conversation while Tyrone works with the questions coming in through the chat. So let me hand this over to John at this point.
All right, thank you, Lori. Hello, everyone. I am very happy that I'm getting the opportunity to moderate this and to be a part of this. I would like to begin by thanking all of the panelists for agreeing to participate in this panel discussion. And I must say that it is an honor for me to be moderating this conversation with you all. So what we plan to do now is we want to have a conversation that get us thinking about the idea of reimagining justice in the United States. We hope to do this by using the Philly DA series as a vehicle to explore these issues. But it's important to note that these issues are national in scope, and they're similar in cities and states across the country. So I would also like to say to y'all, as we having this discussion, please feel free to put questions and comments in the chat box, which will be monitored throughout the sessions. We will try to get to as many questions as possible. If you have a question, we're going to try to get to those questions. Please identify your particular self. And if there's an individual or directed at a particular person, please indicate who you're directing it to. What I would like to do now is I would like to introduce our panelists. And apologies to the panelists that we have very short bios. It doesn't really encompass, all of the things that they have done. First, I would like to introduce DA Larry Krasner. He has been the Philadelphia District Attorney since January of 2018. He was formerly a defense attorney as well as a civil rights attorney in Philadelphia who represented groups such as ACT UP, Occupy Philly, Black Lives Matter. He famously sued the Philadelphia police over 75 times. I would also like to introduce Latonya Myers. She is formerly incarcerated activist and co-founder of a group called Above All Odds, which empower formerly incarcerated Philadelphia residents to create change in their community through mentorship, skills, and financial training literacy. I would also like to introduce Ted Passon. He is an award-winning filmmaker and a video artist who co-created, produced Philadelphia DA, along with co-creators Yoni Brooke and Nicole Cesar. Interestingly, Ted has a direct connection with the Inside Out. He took an Inside Out class in Philly jail back in 2002. I would also like to introduce Kempis Songster. Many of us know him as Ghani. He was incarcerated over 30 years, and he was released 4 years ago. He currently works at the Youth Self-Empowerment Project as a program manager for the Healing Future program, a restorative justice diversion program operated in partnership with the DA's office. And last, I would like to introduce Trevor Warren. He was incarcerated in Oregon State prison system for 18 years and was released 5.5 years ago. He worked 2 jobs, both for the Oregon Justice Resource Center and for the co-founder and administrative coordinator of the Youth Justice Project, as well as managing documents for the legal support services. So I would like just to give you a sense of how we're going to be doing this. We're going to be breaking this up into a number of topics. One of the topics will be reimagining justice. One of them will be alternative to incarceration. And the final one will be combating the narrative involving the criminal justice reform. And so what's going to happen is when we're going to ask a series of questions, and at the end of those sessions, we're going to involve and ask some questions of the audience. And so that's the program. And I'm going to begin. We're going to start off now by reimagining justice. And I'm going to start off just by asking Ted. I want to start off asking Ted a question, because Ted had the genius idea of coming up with this. And so the question I have for you, Ted, I would like to begin is, what made you and your team want to follow and film this prosecutor race back in 2017?
Hey, John, thank you so much for having me. I think, there was a lot of factors. I mean, one was that, I've been paying attention to the criminal justice system in Philadelphia for a while based on some other projects I had done. I come from a family that has had a bunch of people locked up. And I think, being a young person, that kind of complicated my ideas of the criminal justice system and, good people and bad people and things like that. So it was something that I always kind of gravitated towards. And, when I heard that Larry was running, it was just ridiculous, like knowing what had come before him and what we were used to in the city. It just seemed insane. And, I honestly did not think he had a chance to win. But I thought it was a really interesting moment. People were suddenly talking about the district attorney's race, which is usually a race that was kind of a little bit under the radar. It's not something that like the general voter or population would typically talk about when it came up. And so it just seemed like, well, clearly this is an interesting moment. And, we should follow this. We should film this just to see what's going to happen. Maybe it could be an interesting short film. I don't know. Let's see. And then, when Larry actually won, he not only shocked us, but the city and the country as a whole. And, then we kind of realized like, oh, well, this story just got way bigger. Now it's, what's going to happen? What are you going to do next? How are you going to handle this? Are you going to be able to make changes? Why or why not? And so, it just seemed like, the opportunity for what we had to the story we had to tell just grew bigger and bigger. And then, as we were hanging out in the DA's office and filming people's conversations and starting to understand the scope of what they were doing and the scope and the kind of the power of the district attorney, we realized that, we also need to see the people whose lives are being impacted by their decisions. And then so as the series goes on, we widen out and we spend a lot of time in the DA's office, but then we're also embedding with police and we're embedding with local politicians and defense attorneys, people who are incarcerated, people who are formerly incarcerated, victims, and just trying to create like a 360 view of a city that's going, through a major change. And so it was an amazing, although incredibly difficult project to be immersed in for about 4 years.
A follow-up question: were you surprised with the access that was provided to you? Because in the past, you oftentimes didn't, not you, but just people in general, you didn't have access. Were you surprised with the access that was provided to you and your co-creators?
I mean, I think we were always just kind of shocked, or at least me particularly, just to even be inside the DA's office with a camera was just kind of mind-blowing. I mean, outside of a press conference, they're just notoriously opaque institutions. The ACLU calls them the black box of the criminal justice system. You never get to see what goes on in there. From past projects, I used to always have the futile exercise of, trying to contact somebody at the DA's office, either try to get an interview or to try to get access to the most meager, minimal thing. And it never happened. And so even just being in that building just seemed like unbelievable to me. And then, but yeah, I mean, there were plenty of times where, we would be in these conversations and I was just shocked at the conversations that I was getting to be a part of and to listen to and to kind of see like, oh, this is how it works. This is how the decisions are made. It's it was exciting on one hand to just be there when people are doing it. And then on the other hand, it also really kind of humanized the place to me. You just kind of get to remember that like, oh, abstract institution is really just made up of human beings and all their, good and bad parts, whatever, just trying to do their best, making decisions. And I think in some ways it just made it seem like, I don't know. I think it seemed a lot more human. It gave me a much better understanding of how the system works and kind of what we're up against, and maybe kind of the human side of reform and change that maybe you don't really think about, just kind of those interpersonal relationships and how they impact reform as well.
Thank you, Ted. So DA Krasner, do you mind me calling you Larry?
I would prefer it, Mr. Pace.
Okay. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I'm
All
really
right.
enjoying this commentary so far. I really enjoy it when Ted says my running was ridiculous and he knew I wasn't going to win. Because first of all, that's Ted, but also, it was kind of true at the time.
Yeah. Well, I think that was the sentiment of a lot of people. So the question I have for you is, what made you want to run for the office of district attorney, especially after being the defense attorney and the civil rights attorney for most of your career?
So I wanted to run for district attorney basically because for 30 years I tried to do something else. I was a county public defender, a federal public defender, and then I was a private attorney who did both criminal, some of it court appointed, a lot of it private, and did civil rights. And my civil rights work was often trying to bring unaccountable police to a level of accountability. And what I saw as a very busy trial lawyer for those 30 years was that I might pull somebody out of a well. I might get a little justice on one case, but it never felt like the justice was complete because there were so many other people being left behind. Watching the system, not only in your own cases, but as you sat in a courtroom or you were out in a hallway with a cup of coffee, watching that system, it was inescapable that there were more and more jails, there were bigger courthouses, there were more judges, there were more years of incarceration. My career basically coincided with the rise of mass incarceration. And as a consequence, when we finally came to yet one more election, having been through so many lousy chief prosecutors who had done so much harm, I looked around and every one of these candidates was really just promising the same thing. Sure, they'd sanded off their rhetoric a little bit, but they were promising more years in jail, more charges, more cases, more felonies. They were promising everything that was damaging us so much and was really hurting public safety as well. And that is why I felt like, even though I was an unlikely win, I felt like I needed to try.
Yeah. So you are one of a number of progressive prosecutors across the country. Explain to people, because a lot of people don't know, what does the idea of a progressive prosecutor mean to you? And what do you think it means to the criminal justice system?
Certainly will. But first of all, I want to be clear. I am one of many. A number of them got there before me. There's some great progressive prosecutors in the United States. Kim Foxx is just one example in Chicago of a progressive prosecutor who got there before me, who has in many ways mentored and been able to help me out with some of her great ideas. Kim Gardner in St. Louis, Rachel Rollins in Boston. I could go on and on. We are at the point in the United States right now where in the space of about 12 years, we've gone from essentially zero jurisdictions having a progressive prosecutor to 20.1% of the United States population currently having a progressive prosecutor. I'm talking 70 million people. So again, we got to give credit where it's due. This is not a movement of prosecutors. We are nothing but the car mechanics here. This is a grassroots movement for criminal justice reform, a grassroots movement to do a whole lot of things. And yes, it has to do with bail, it has to do with mass incarceration, it has to do with the death penalty, it has to do with equal treatment for everyone, all that stuff. But this is a huge grassroots movement. In my mind, this is the civil rights movement of our time, or at least one of the equally important, most important civil rights movements of our time. So what does it mean to be a progressive prosecutor? Simply put, I think it means to be a modern prosecutor. It means to be interested in facts and truth and data. It means to be interested in policies, and it means to recognize that the way that we will be safer is through prevention rather than punishment, rehabilitation rather than punishment, public health rather than punishment. This country has had an orgy of locking as many people up as possible. I mean, to be honest, a lot of the traditional prosecutors are upset anybody's walking the sidewalk at all. If they had their way, well, I'd be locked up. I didn't want to point to anybody in this room, but I'd be locked up too. So that's what it means. Certainly there are some key issues, and mass incarceration might be kind of the number one key issue that you'll see over and over as being an issue where progressive prosecutors focus.
Okay, thank you. Tyrone? Tyrone, are there any questions from the audience?
You're on mute, Tyrone.
Okay, yes, there's one question so far. This question is coming from Andre. At what point does the conversation on reform stop focusing on diversion and focus on harm reduction and acknowledging the agency of criminalized people? Forcing people to choose between prison and or fines and meeting their material, social, and health needs isn't harm reduction. People engage in criminalized behavior because they aren't given better long-term and permanent solutions, not because they enjoy the carceral system.
Is that directed to anyone in particular?
Anyone.
Can I just jump in for 1 second? I love that question. I thank the person from the audience for directing that question to the whole panel. Thank you, Tyrone, and thank you, John.
Yes,
Love
yes.
you so much. You're doing amazing work. I want to talk about, I think Larry hit a great points, is that this is coming from what the community wants. You know, we want solutions, we want healing, we want restoration, but we have to address those underlying social issues and what's going on, which perpetuating the harm and the trauma that's within our communities. We have to have integrity, discernment within our, not only prosecution, but also within our whole system. And I do want to salute those that's not afraid to infiltrate, right? Infiltrate those institutions and speak truth to power. And I would love to see, you know, more formerly incarcerated individuals talking about what got them to that point and what we need to do to reverse that. Because plain and simple, people are profiting off our pain. They're profiting off our failures and not our success. And when we do that, that's not bringing the best and the brightest out of our communities. Most importantly, our inner city communities. Pennsylvania is a big state, but Philadelphia is one of the most impoverished states. This is the birthplace of democracy. And I feel as though that with this progressive movement moving forth, alongside individuals that can speak truth to power openly and really unveil what's really going on inside those chambers when they say, I want to talk on the side, right? Like what's really going on when our prosecutors are looking more for a win than more for justice, right? When our defense attorneys are afraid to speak up when they know that a judge, it shouldn't be an excuse that, oh, this is the judge that we have. We have to hold them accountable. We have to allow individuals to be civically engaged with our right to vote as formerly incarcerated individuals, hold them accountable, know the laws that govern them the same way that they know the laws that govern us. And I think the Inside Out program is a great example of that, right? These law libraries, these institutions, these brilliant brains that's held inside and refuse to conform to the narrative that we're a beast, that if we come home, we're not going to provide the healing that we need within our communities, but we have the solution. So, you know, how can we get those resources? How can we understand these laws to not only, one, hold our elected officials accountable and vote them out if they're not trying to bring healing back into our community, and two, not perpetuate the white supremacy that people are profiting off our pain. And I think that these institutions and these law schools, and I hope to inspire, you know, future defenders and prosecutors not to just go for the win, but go for the justice, go for what's right and stand up for it. So I think that addressing the underlying issues, to go back to your question, is that we educate and we solve the root issues. People pray to go home, but when they come home in the middle of winter and they don't have a home to go to, that's a problem. That's a social justice problem. So I don't, I just want to stop there because I appreciate y'all and I appreciate that question.
Yeah. Thank you, Latonya. Just a very brief question for Ted, very brief. When you were making this film, did you know ahead of time that the footage you were shooting would turn into a series? And how did you go about the process of realizing that you were filming something huge and then contact the right people to make it a full production? And this is for Ted, if you can be briefly.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the short answer is no. In the beginning, we didn't know what it was. We thought maybe it was a short film, and then we thought maybe it was a feature. And then, maybe a little less than a year into shooting, we had been filming all of these different storylines, all of these different narratives that we were finding around the office and other places. And we couldn't figure out how to make it short enough to be a feature, to be 90 minutes, and still have it be a good story. We felt like we just could not wrap our heads around what is the short version of this. And then the other thing that was happening was that all the stories we were following, we were able to follow them all the way through. When a lot of times you start following a story and either you miss something or it doesn't work out, and so you just let it go. And we were able to finish them. And so at a certain point, we were just like, I think this is better as a series, which is much harder to make because it requires a lot more money. So, then thankfully our producers were able to set up meetings for us at different networks. And thankfully PBS agreed that it should be a series. And we started working with them. First, we thought it was 5 episodes, then 6, and then it turned into 8. And now here we are, so.
I think at this time, we're going to show a little clip.
Criminal justice policies changed dramatically in the city of Philadelphia after a new DA, Larry Krasner, took office. He was backed by George Soros, and Krasner massively scaled back law enforcement in the city. We spoke recently with the president of Philadelphia's Fraternal Order of Police, John McNesby, and here's what he told us.
There's been 6,500 less cases brought before the Criminal Justice Center here. Crime is up. 4,000 felons are on the streets running the city of Philadelphia. We have officers out there arresting people on a daily basis, and they're walking out the back of police stations.
Philadelphia is one of the most incarcerated places on the planet. On the planet. It's just unbelievable that they have taken what is not normal and normalized it to such an extent that anything that is done to try to restore balance or bring us back into national or international standards is seen as some left-wing agenda to make people less safe when people weren't safe for the last 30 years.
On top of that, he's running his own show here, and it's like a carnival act.
The enemies of civilization, for sure. Thanks very much for telling us what's going on in Philadelphia. I appreciate it. Good to see you.
The enemies of civilization? Who is he describing? Wait, are we the enemies of civilization? Oh, I would strongly disagree with that. Come on in, we're doing ARD reviews.
So, defendant sold $10 worth of marijuana to an undercover officer 102 grams of marijuana and $650 were recovered from the defendant's car. No prior convictions, no prior diversion.
Anything else in the file that you should think about?
He's been working as a home health aide for several years, takes care of his mother, who's currently battling stage 4 lung cancer. He's also expecting a child in the coming months. I would say yes.
I say yes.
Same.
Okay. What's next?
It involves a discharged firearm, which definitely gave me pause. So this guy was riding a dirt bike, was approached by a group of men who he believed were intending to forcibly rob him of his dirt bike. He did have a valid license to carry. He fired 2 warning shots into the air. The defendant is a military veteran. He was deployed to Afghanistan twice. You know, it's just the discharged firearm. You know, I'm not sure what to do with these cases.
We're trying to calculate a risk that we have no way of really knowing for sure.
You at first think that discharging a firearm would automatically disqualify, but the primary purpose of ARD is to give someone the benefit of avoiding a conviction. From a harm reduction perspective, every conviction you avoid is a good thing. And then the risk you were talking about, and my job is to protect y'all from that risk so that you make decisions that you think is seeking justice without worrying about all the other ways in which it can be interpreted.
So Latonya, this is a question for you. You've gave us a little sense of your background already, and I want to say that it's always a pleasure of mine, to see you, and so I thank you for being on this panel. This question for you is: these issues have been real for you because you were facing the real possibility of going back to prison for a minor probation violation, missing a meeting with a probation officer, which we see later in episode 4. What did Larry Krasner's desire to become DA and the idea that we're being fought for mean to you, and what kind of change were you hoping for?
Yeah, I thank you so much for that question. I hope y'all can feel the passion and the eagerness of us coming together and getting better understanding of what it's really like to sit in a cell, to not be able to afford your freedom, to pray to God that have people not pull you away from your goals, but push you towards it. Not to conform to the narrative of a group or this individual, but to also look up and see that your current district attorney is being indicted and there's a whole judge election and there's a DA election that you never even knew that you can possibly participate in. I think, I found my truth through my passion. I found my passion through my pain, and, studying the law while I was inside, it was like, hold up, there's our laws that govern individuals. We have to hold them accountable the same way that they hold us accountable. But how do I get access to this information? How do I know that these elements of crime fit exactly what the Constitution says that I should be held on, right? And I think seeing Larry's race and then making that connection and really refusing to conform to that narrative that was depicted that, we are unencourageable. I think that was one of the things that I really, there wasn't a voting poll on State Road. We can vote, but nobody asking us what our opinions are when we have these individuals sitting on tenors for 10 years at a time. So I think that was the wake up call for me to really be civically engaged, but also to say, I'm not the person that you say that I am. I grew up with the same dreams and goals as that you pray for your kids and your grandkids. And if given an opportunity, not only could you save my life, but ultimately we might come up with a cure for cancer to save your grandkid life if we don't, continuously to oppress certain people from certain communities. And once we learn how to hold people and accountable and be civically engaged for these judges that's making determinations. And then from there, I had to learn that, hey, the district attorney, that's one part of the puzzle, but there's a whole system that we have to go after, and we have to infiltrate that system in order to dismantle it and to build it up and not break us down. So I just think, I think all the former juvenile lifers, Ghani, as well as yourself, John, for coming home and really laying a foundation of positive outlets to speaking up and, being able to inspire others to be civically engaged and not to perpetuate this harm of white supremacy. And that ultimately, makes us have to be in survival mode. That's not the way it's supposed to be. We pay taxes like everyone else, but we're formally incarcerated. We get 1/5 of the law. We get that applied. We can't get subsidized housing. We can't get certain positions of employment. So are they perpetuating this to keep us oppressed as peasants in a society? This is the birthplace of democracy. This is not where we do that at. And I just want to educate people and hopefully have students go back in these institutions to help bring out the brilliance, the talent, and everything that, can be a solution towards ending this and not perpetuating it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Latonya. So speaking of Ghani, you spent more than 30 years incarcerated, and you saw people going in and out of the system after many years. What systemic changes were you hoping for that could make a difference in what we had been witnessing for all those years in the lives of so many people caught up in the system?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, John, Laurie, Tyrone, and everybody for pulling this all together and for inviting me to be a part. So you might imagine that, I've witnessed quite a bit over the span of 30 years, even in the closed and compressed and concentrated confines of prison, and I've witnessed it through many eyes. That is the eyes of a 15-year-old, the eyes of a 16-year-old, the eyes of a 17-year-old, all the way up to the eyes of a 45-year-old. I've had an intimate relationship with the cyclical state of crime and punishment that you mentioned, even as I was stationary, sentenced to be stationary forever or until death, behind the walls. And I saw the daily influx of people, old and very old, young and very young. I myself entered when I was quite young at the age of 15, but I didn't have an assessment of that or an analysis of what that or anything meant about my situation then. An analysis was born and grew and matured over time, like any living thing. And I did have a living analysis. It was a witnessing, it was an experiencing. So I don't answer your question, John, with any kind of expertise, just a bearing of witness. Witnessing people being shuffled into prison in long lines of orange jumpsuits in cuffs and shackles, through the hallways, like both you and Tyrone, we used to see every day up to 4, kind of like slave coffers. But where people in slavery were innocent, or at least didn't do anything to warrant the nightmare that had engulfed their lives, I was seeing people who, while some were undoubtedly innocent, because I know many people and had made friends with people who were innocent, many people were like me, coming and carrying the burden of guilt, and that burden was just another crushing weight added to pre-existing burdens of growing up in socially toxic environments, poverty, the burdens of the crack cocaine era, the burdens of ethnic displacement called gentrification, the burdens of all kinds of trauma and lack of mental health care, the burdens of rampant intracommunal violence, which, as Parker J. Palmer says, is what results when people can't find a way out of their suffering. And so, the burdens of all of the things that characterize life in the concrete jungles that we grow up in. And so, add to that now guilt from hurting somebody in your own community, your own neighborhood, seeing and coming to know and develop friendships with some of these people who, like myself, had no idea the hand that was rocking their cradle and maybe didn't care or couldn't see or care to look that far or deeply into things. You know, I then saw these people after years, you know, trying to get themselves together, being mentored by people like Tyrone, mentored by people like John, and myself even, seeing them go home full of promise, inspiration, ideas, renewed sense of purpose and humanity, right? But also fear, you know, unresolved issues still, right? Because we weren't professional psychologists, you know what I'm saying? But we were mentoring each other and helping each other cope as best we could, right? Only to see them after a year or a month or a few months, you know, come back, you know, through the hallways of prison, dejected, ashamed, can't even look me or you remember, John, can't even look us in the face, or the face of the people that they left behind the walls. Now they carry new and heavier burdens, right? And so one important ground we never cover, or qualitatively at least, is the exploration of accountability, the real accountability for harm. There's no true transformation without accountability, no healing without it. And it's something that's not really supported by the system's processes. Accountability has consequences in the system. We might want to lay the weight of guilt and shame down, not deny it, but not carry it as a secret or a lie, right? But it's consequential. The first words we're told when we're arrested is, anything you say can and will be used against you. So there begins our personal process of reinventing ourselves in a way that doesn't allow us the avenue to own up to what we did in a way that fosters healing, transformation, reconciliation, and redemption. So I began working and hoping for more restorative and transformative processes in the system, even from behind the walls. And I wanted to see also second chances for people who had convicted themselves to regaining their humanity and moral rectitude, right? And to giving back to the community on both sides of the walls. I wanted to also see, you know, the end of the condemning of children to people, you know, or people whose identities and capacity to make responsible decisions had not been fully developed and cultivated yet. I wanted to see children no longer automatically charged as adults and placed in adult jails and tried as adults and sent to adult state prisons like I was. Like Daniel Sered said in our zero-sum system, complexity is a liability. So I wanted to see a legal process that considers the complexities of human behavior and actions and the complexity of every person. I wanted to see a system where, you know, the belief in the need for hope and healing in our communities and the belief in the human capacity for redemption informs how it treats people who make bad decisions, do bad things, or commit even the ultimate trespass, such as I had done.
Thank you, Gandhi.
Okay.
Tyrone, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a really interesting question for Larry real quick. And we'd like to hear your thoughts on this question, Larry. Do you hear from any cops who support your work and want to see a change in policing?
Great question. Thank you for that. Answer is yes. You know, my campaign was actually endorsed by the African American Officers Association, which is not the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police. That's the bargaining unit. That's the union that every single police officer is required to join. The organization I'm talking about is known as the Guardians. What you'll find in a lot of cities is that there is either one or more, you know, organization that is an organization of Black officers or Latinx officers, sometimes another group, and they are not necessarily 100% on the same page. So I was endorsed by the Guardians in the general election in 2017. I was endorsed in both the primary and the general election this year. And to me, that's very refreshing. You know, one of the things that the head of the organization said when they endorsed me was, you know what, having been Black officers in Philadelphia, maybe we could use a civil rights lawyer as a DA. You know, and it comes from an experience, not just of seeing what was done to other Black people on the street or other Latinx people. It comes from the experience of what they talk about as being Black and blue. The reality that there is discrimination within the department, and it is discrimination against, you know, whatever marginalized outsider group is trying to get in and is trying to have its share of participation. So certainly as a group, we had that endorsement, which was a statement. You know, when you stand up to the FOP and you say, you may go with Trump, you may go with Krasner's opponent, but we're with Krasner, and God knows he's against Trump. When you do that, you're making a statement to your fellow officers. So that was important. There are also many, many individuals who are supportive of what we're doing. But I think to simplify it down, what you got to understand is that these police unions are run by their retired members. And anytime you're looking at the retired membership of a police union in a big city, it is going to be older, it's going to be whiter, it's going to be maler, it's going to be more Republican and more conservative than a current group of police officers who are diversifying to some extent, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, this isn't night and day. It is likely that most current Philadelphia police officers are not with us. They get a steady supply of misinformation from their union. A lot of them really do like to be unaccountable. A lot of them are okay with racism and brutality. But in every group, we got to get away from stereotypes. And so what you will find is that even when many members of the organization are against you, there are a lot of people who know you treated their child right, or who know that police officers mistreated their child, even if they are police officers themselves. And they don't forget that. I believe that our support within the police department is increasing, but it's increasing with the right people, people who believe in a more modern and more progressive form of policing.
Thank you, Larry. That's so good to know that you have some support in the police department. And Ghani, it's good to see you, man. And congratulations on all the great work you're doing.
Thank you, Ty.
I hear about you.
Thank
But here's
you,
a question. Here's a question for you, Ghani. Do you have any advice for students or other individuals who want to make change in their communities regarding justice and incarceration, but are unsure of where to start?
Yeah, my advice, you know, I'm kind of like guided by these words by Leela Watson, you know, when she said, you know, if you come here to help me, something to that effect. If you come here to help me, then you're wasting your time. But if you come here because you see your liberation is bound up in mind, then maybe we can struggle together. And so I would advise every young person, you know, that's whether they're getting into the legal field or whatever field, right? They imagine their client or anybody from the communities that they're going to be working in saying those words to them, right? That if, you know, they have to see their humanity, their own liberation bound up in the humanity or the humanization, right? And the liberation of the people that they're going to be working in, because they're going to encounter those entrenched forces like that was so well articulated in the documentary. You know what I'm saying? Like Larry pointed out, like things that has a terrible history, you know, things that have been entrenched for hundreds of years that's going to take a Herculean effort to change, right? Young people who are getting into, especially the legal field, you know, driven by, you know, social justice hearts, you know, we might call naivete, right? Because we know what they're going to be going up against when they get in these labyrinthian institutions, right? And they ram their heads up against those things that are resistant to change, right? We know that a few things are going to happen. You know, either they're going to be discouraged, they're going to be burnt out, they're going to be disillusioned, right? They're going to lose inspiration, or they're going to stick to it, right? They're going to be isolated, they're going to be looked at as fringe, or they're going to find like-minded, you know, kindred spirits, you know what I mean? And together move the plot forward. Our advice to them in any scenario, right, is to see the humanity of the people that you're fighting, if your own humanity bound up in the people that you're fighting for, and to see this as a struggle to be more fully human, right? And don't let up on that. And in the end, you're going to be standing on the right side of history.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more?
No, I think we can already go into a video.
Okay.
Yeah.
Communications. Yeah, this is Ben.
This afternoon, U.S. Attorney William McSwain lobbied a volley of criticism against Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner.
The policies that his office is pursuing are a danger to Philadelphia. There's a very, very strong correlation here Common sense tells you if you're pursuing an anti-law enforcement agenda and then homicides go up, that has something to do with it. When the office leads the charge for lenient bail conditions, when the office consistently undercharges violent crime cases, when its overall stated priority is decarceration, and when the district attorney refers to himself as a public defender with power, violent criminals take notice of all of that, and they become emboldened.
I'm confident that the policies have not been the cause of the rise in the number of shootings. We haven't seen anything in the data.
All right, there are things I need to understand here. I see your overall numbers for recidivism.
We actually calculated how many additional people were released because of the policy. And it's like 2,000 people. It's a big number.
And there weren't negative side effects with recidivism or with failure to appear.
These policies that were so, attacked worked. Yeah. Selma and Louise haven't quite gone off the cliff yet.
It's unusual where you have external independent professors at two different schools evaluate your policy and basically say, what you wanted to happen, happened.
The office is putting fear into the hearts of law-abiding citizens who have to deal with the terror of homicide and other violent crime in their neighborhoods.
Nobody here is pro-crime. Fuck him twice.
It's an attempt to stir up fear in a city where this man doesn't even live. So let's talk a little science.
All right, we ready?
All right.
You want to announce my resignation?
Yeah. All right. Is that your next move? We have to have conversations around criminal justice that are based in fact, that are based in evidence and based in science. What is not called science is claiming that it's, quote, common sense, unquote, that if homicides go up, then they were caused by the district attorney. And what's even less scientific is to put up a prepared board showing the levels of homicides over the last 6 years, which shows that homicides went up for 5 consecutive years, and blame the district attorney's administration that's been in 1 year. That is what just happened.
Critics say that too often people cherry pick statistics. Maybe McSwain's doing it in this case, and you're doing it with that report. What would you say to those critics? That everyone tries to
Mr. McSwain is essentially not presenting any statistics. What he said is that it's common sense, that if homicides go up for the 5th consecutive year, it's all my fault. We did our own data, metrics, analysis, which came to certain conclusions about bail reform. That is called science.
His argument is, as you let more violent criminals out, those criminals are on the streets, that also attracts more criminals to those areas, and you're going to have more violent crime. That's his rationale.
People can say anything. Here's the reality.
Doesn't that make sense?
Here's the reality. Let me answer your question. He can give me a report in which he can show me that any one of those things is true. But we all know the truth. He doesn't have one.
Don't you guys have to find some way personally to work together for the betterment of the citizens?
This was done for reasons that are political. And the reality is that, just one second. You've done that too. May I finish? I also am mindful that when you deal with a bully, sometimes they're not interested in working together, and sometimes all that you can do is control your own behavior.
Well, another press conference with Larry Krasner. This is not the happiest I've ever seen Larry Krasner, but Larry walks to a beat of his own drum.
Even if you're doing a policy really well, there are outliers. There's going to be times when things go wrong and people get hurt. It's incredibly hard for data to win out over emotion. There are those narratives out there that reform is related to violence, and even if they're not true, it just becomes political capital. I mean, risk is a big part of it. It's just easy to do things the same way.
Trevor, this is a question for you. I'm sure that during your incarceration, you spent many years thinking about issues of crime and justice. Now, since you've been home, you've been very involved in addressing these issues, including working with youth involved in the justice system and advocating on behalf of those sentenced to long-term sentences. A number of prosecutors around the country are looking to rethink the traditional way of prosecuting cases. what are some of the things that you think they should be considering?
Thank you, John, and thanks all around for having me. I did do some considerable thinking on this topic, and I believe one of the ways in which we need to move forward is that we need to be holistic in our thinking, and we need to be collaborative in our thinking, because the justice system, if you will, is not defined by any one part of it, but by the collective whole. And so if we have sentences that don't acknowledge or understand what the outcomes of those sentences are, meaning we have no concept of what a person's lived experience in the carceral setting is, and that system doesn't have resources available, then we need to think about how we're sentencing folks in a very different way. I also think that we need to be holistic in our approach, in that in my experience interacting with folks on both sides of crime, there's this idea of justice that's kind of systemically developed, and we're really prone to being responsive by way of justice looks like X number of years. And in my experience, oftentimes there is not a deeper dive into that question. And when there is a deeper dive and you get to the kind of the root of that answer, it's not a number of years. It's really comes down to, when is an individual able to reintegrate into the community and society safely and productively, right? So if in 5 years an individual is going to have served their sentence and step back into a community and cause the exact same harm but to someone else, then justice really wasn't served. If those who were negatively impacted by an individual's actions have no access to healing in a way that's individualized, then justice wasn't served, because folks are not able to process through that harm and that trauma. And that's equally true of those who've caused the harm, right? If we don't have individualized approaches to our justice system, as opposed to the cookie cutter responses that we have in many ways become very reliant on, then we're not going to be able to have a society that can embrace and understand and acknowledge and move forward in a more collective way. And part of that means that there needs to be at least efforts to be collaborative in our approaches, and for varying systems to understand their counterpart systems.
Yeah. So I assume, and you can elaborate a little bit more, and I assume you're saying that this hasn't been a part of the systems in which we've been encountering. And so the follow-up question is, there are a network of progressive prosecutors that have been growing steadily over the past 10 years. Does it give you hope that these systems will change?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we're seeing in a lot of ways is a push towards a more humanized approach, right? We've kind of ebbed and flow with mandatory minimums. I think that's a great example of cookie cutter responses to crime, and saying that all crime looks exactly the same. If this is the charge, then this is how we approach it. I think we've come a long way in recognizing that young individuals are still growing and developing, and their moral character is in flux, and they're not at a place where their actions should define them for the rest of their lives, nor, in my opinion, should anyone's single actions define them for the rest of their lives. We're human beings, we're capable of change. And I think that in a lot of ways, we're seeing more folks who are recognizing the value in that individualized approach, that are recognizing the systemic errors that we have been perpetuating for any number of years, and that are open to and desiring involvement in a collaborative approach. And I think that's what you see. You know, I often speak to college students in any number of classes, and oftentimes law students. And I will regularly say, have you considered becoming a district attorney? Going to the district attorney's office. And there's often, you know, I live in a pretty liberal state, at least in some ways. And oftentimes there's like, well, no, I would never think about that. It's like, look, we need good people to be in positions of considering what justice looks like, and in thinking about crime and how to engage that, and how to address healing in a meaningful way. Because our justice system, kind of, shoulders this responsibility of what that distribution looks like, and therefore they have that responsibility. And without the knowledge of how we can kind of move forward in a collaborative and holistic way, it becomes very difficult to do so. So I'm absolutely encouraged by what I'm seeing, and I regularly encourage and hope to see more of it.
Thank you, Trevor. DA Larry Krasner, this is a question for you. How have you and the people in your office dealt with the resistance that you have run into in trying to make the systemic changes that you had?
Well, first of all, it is what we do all day, honestly. We have had some success and we've had some losses, because that's just how it goes. The resistance that you saw, for example, coming from Bill McSwain, who was our Trump-appointed U.S. attorney, that was all coming from his own political aspirations. As soon as Trump lost, he quit and has now announced he's running for governor, which we all knew was what he was really doing anyway. He was trying to elevate himself as an old school conservative in a state that went for Donald Trump, 5 years ago. That's what he was doing. So you have to recognize where it's coming from. In his case, it was just selfishness and ambition. He really had no interest in any kind of vigorous pursuit of public safety. And like I said in there, no, he didn't even live in a town he was trying to terrify. When it comes to other actors, you'll find that there are other reasons. Sometimes they're just used to doing things a certain way. Sometimes it's a situation where they see an advantage. But what we found over and over and over is you just got to come straight at it. When they're going to say, this is how I feel, or I talk to one person who says, or perception is reality, the answer is no, actually. Reality is reality. Perception is reality, is what Donald Trump says. Reality is reality. Here's my numbers. Here's my truth. Here's my facts. We will give you the facts, but we will also reach for your heart by talking about specific examples with real life human beings, so you can understand what we're trying to get at. That's a key part of it. One of the things that surprised me, one way I think that we came at the resistance was kind of accidental, and that was our conviction integrity unit. Here we are trying to get innocent people out of jail. Didn't know if the public would find this terrifying or wonderful. Well, as it turned out, they found it wonderful, but they found it wonderful because it was restoring their belief that at least they had some people in law enforcement who were trying to make sure it was accurate, who were trying to do the right thing with it, right? So as that starts to build up, as that snowball gets bigger and bigger, of people seeing that even if you make mistakes, and we make mistakes all the time, you're trying to be fair, you're trying to be even-handed, you're trying to be just. You understand that power is dangerous and you're trying to use it with restraint. When you just keep coming with that, it adds up. And it adds up partly just because the power of the job is that people are going to watch you. They're going to hear you. They're going to attack you, but you're going to have a platform from which you can respond. And that's really been it. Our main weapon, honestly, has been a great big club with the word truth written on it, that we just keep coming.
Yeah, this is a follow-up. And because I hear what you're saying in terms of, speaking the truth and you're using data, but people been conditioned, in a particular way for so long. And so how do you really overcome that fear and law and order? Because they've been conditioned in that way for so long. And so, so really, I just want you to give us a sense of how do you overcome that there?
So we have overcome it. And let me give you just a couple of quick facts on that. So, we just had a primary on a reelect, and as happened to Kim Foxx a couple of years ago, as happened to George Gascon a year ago, we were targeted across the country. Everybody who wanted to shut down progressive prosecution was coming for us. And that's how the press was covering it, that this was going to be the end, man. We're going to have a battle. We're going to get decimated. Finally, we're going to turn back this terrible progressive prosecution. Not what happened. We got 2 out of every 3 votes in Philly with a couple $1 million aimed at us to spread exactly the message that you're concerned about. And here's where the tire really meets the road. We looked at the areas with the most gun violence, the ones where they are devastated every day, where children literally have died in the street and bled in the street. We didn't get 67% of the vote there like we did across the city. We got 85. We got 80 to 85% of the vote. So something is going on, and I'm about to tell you what I think it is, which is we should never underestimate how smart the people really are. The institutions are way behind the people. And one of the things that the people know is that mass incarceration has made it worse. When you took all that money out of your public schools and your rec centers and your summer jobs and your entrepreneurial training, when you took all that out of there and you spent it all on incarceration, when you took fathers away from their home who didn't have to be away from their home, so you had children who did not have a parent around, when you did that, you made it worse. That's not my opinion. That is the opinion of people who have lived it. And it's even the opinion at this point, because mass incarceration got so enormous and so heavy and crushed so many people that you will hear this stuff from middle class, even affluent white suburban people. And you will hear it because they went to high school with someone who became addicted to opioids and instead of having treatment got crushed, turned into a felon and put away for way too long. They've seen it happen to their friends, their classmates. Even if it didn't hit them directly, it has affected them and people near them and has affected their pocket. So these messages are not going to work. As I've just mentioned, we're at 20.1% of the US population now has a progressive prosecutor. That number 2 years ago was 10%. The 2 years around George Floyd, we went from 10% of the US population had a progressive prosecutor to 20.1%. In another 2 years, can we get to 30%? And then can we see that their actual influence, because these are mostly big cities, is 45% of all criminal cases in the United States. This is a revolution that is absolutely working. The people were with it. And I'm going to make a final point here. I hope somebody asks me more about it. But I truly believe that the preservation of democracy, and democracy is under attack like never before, the preservation of democracy requires that we have criminal justice reform on the ballot in every election everywhere. And if we do that, then people who have not seen a reason to vote, unlikely reluctant voters, including some people who are probably in jail right now, but who will be out for an upcoming election, those people will turn out and they will vote. We saw it every time I ran. We have seen it in other locations. And once those people turn out, people who are disgusted, disenchanted, feel disenfranchised from the system, they finally say, well, here's something I'm willing to vote for. You know, I might or might not like Joe Biden, but I'll tell you what I do like. I like ending mass incarceration. I like ending stop and frisk. I got my feelings about the death penalty. When those people turn out and vote, what you will see is all of these right-wing Republicans, all these Trumpies swept away in a giant blue wave, and all their tricks with fixing the judiciary and trying to steal your right to vote will be swept away with it. And that is why I say, for real, for real, for real, we have a lot of people on this call. There are people around you who are going to be involved in elections. Get criminal justice reform on the ballot wherever you are, whether that's a candidate, whether it's a ballot initiative, whether it's a piece of legislation, you get it there. And we will see not only real criminal justice reform, but we are going to see democracy getting saved.
Thank you. Tyrone.
Mr. Tyrone, Mr. John, I just want to know if I can add something to what Larry said that was so poignant and it touched my heart. This is not something that I studied to go to school for. This is not something that is a career. This is something that is emotionally embedded into the survival, not only my family, but my community. And this is not something that we just analyze and put data on, but this is something that we all have to step up and do the right thing for. We all have to utilize our right as to be civically engaged, to know that one defendant was once a victim at one point. Most of the people that go through the system, they're just not criminals. We are people. We are people. We are brothers, we're sisters, we're daughters, we're mothers. We are the individuals that make up this country. And I think that if we all be able to come together and stand on the right side of what's right, to understand what's going on and how people are perpetuating and oppressing us just for their profit. But we still have that chance to save democracy in the birthplace of it. And that's why I think it's so beautiful that this grassroots, that individuals that's inside and in custody are learning to advocate and connect with different resources. That's what's most important. We're not just saving lives, we're saving our future from going into a direction where we don't want it to go. And we all together collectively on this call got the power to come together across from different tables to learn how to build. How can we uplift each other? And I don't want to ramble, but I just want to make that point that is so serious. That people that's govern our communities are not even from our communities are understanding. The real data is what happens when you come home and you have no home to come to. My organization, Above All Odds, paid $23,000 in rental assistance for individuals that stepped off state road and had nowhere to go during COVID-19. What happens when they tell you to quarantine, but you have no place to really quarantine to? What happens when you go in these institutions, in these places, when people look at you and belittle you, or they judge their success off of your failures? That's not what it's about. It's about really bringing out the genius within these inner city communities to step up and stand shoulder to shoulder with individuals that they thought that we would never survive, with individuals that they thought that we would never be able to speak up and say what harm is being done. And all I'm saying in the saying that is we have to educate our potential defenders, our potential prosecutors, to really stand up and say what's happening. Talk about the harm. Talk about the nuances of not wanting to go in front of this judge because you know this person is going to deny your motion right off bat, and not going back to that family and saying I did the best that I could do. And then prosecuting, for my example, I've been prosecuted and represented as a victim by the same prosecutor. So I just want people to really understand that this is not a numbers game. This is not a facade. It's not a cool thing. This is real. This is our life. And this is our society that we're laying a foundation for our kids that's growing up to inherit. And we want them to do it in the best and the most upright way possible. And that's not by belittling others or judging their success off of other people's failures. It's about uplifting and building up our nation so that we can complete globally, so that we can bring all the genius, all the talent that we have to save our humankind. And I just want to stop there. Thank you.
No, I thank you for sharing that. And just if briefly, Latonya, say, the question that I asked DA Larry Krasner in terms of the fair, what can the average citizen do in terms of helping him to combat that narrative? Because I think that's important, because when we're out there, we have to be the ones, to help, support that. And so, just can you say something briefly on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think, let's not be afraid to go to our local state representative office that's within our communities, that their job and responsibility is to go on Capitol Hill and talk about what is the barriers. If you need a prom outfit, you don't have to go to a store and steal it. You can go to your state representative and ask for help, right? Let's hold them accountable. Let's let them know what's going on. And we can't depend on one counterparter in this system to just say everything is going to be okay. No, he needs help, because at the end of the day, if you got a DA that's willing to infiltrate and cross enemy lines to say, yo, y'all not doing this right, then we need to understand what are these powers to be that's really trying to stop him from exposing what's happening. We need to understand the laws before they even get passed. We need to stop them from even going on to get voted in. So what I would say is stay civically engaged, go to abovealladds.com. If there's anyone that needs help or want to understand, like, how did that stop sign get there? What is stop and frisk? What can we do? Why do the police oversee the arbitration when we put in complaints about them? What about the police that really want to do the right thing but scared because they in a blue game? And how can we, like, what can we do as a community to really step up and stand up, to be not only retroactive but proactive in its approach, and not just doing it as a facade, but just doing it for real because it needs to be done, and it's going to save the lives of so many civilians. I think that Philadelphia in the upcoming years, as we come together, can and will be the most safest city in the nation. Not only the safest inner city, but the most thriving inner city in the nation, if we just come off our high horses, speak truth to power, and not be afraid.
Thank you. DA Larry Krasner, this is a question for you. This is a question for you. You had the opportunity to take your staff from the DA's office into Greater Fort Prison to participate in a workshop with the men there who had all been involved with the Inside Out think tank. What was that experience like for you? And why did you feel the need that it was important to do that? In fact, important enough that you encouraged your staff to take part in several workshops.
So thank you for that question. You know, as a criminal defense attorney, I did the math at one point and I realized that I had spent over a year of my life in jails. I don't mean at night. And I'm, you know, let's be honest, I'm a tourist. I wasn't staying there overnight, but it was still a year of my time going to state prisons and sitting in that space and talking to people in that space. And I felt like it was very, very important for attorneys in a prosecutor's office who don't generally get that experience. They're not defense attorneys. I thought it was very important for them to do that because what you find in a jail is a lot of complexity and you find human beings. You know, nobody's perfect. You'll find imperfection there as well, but you find human beings. And the system is all about dehumanizing people, not even letting them have their names. You go in a courtroom, most people just want to call you defendant, defendant, defendant. They won't even say your name. I mean, it was a deliberate tactic in the district attorney's office never to say the name of a defendant in a courtroom. I've seen the memos. It's real because they never wanted a jury or a judge to see a defendant in a courtroom as a human being. Well, I did want that. I wanted people to see that. And I also believe, have always believed, that there's actually a lot that people who are in custody can do. I believe that not because I'm hopeful, but I believe that because I'd already seen it. I had seen that there was a network of people in custody who talk to people out of custody, who have the capacity sometimes to squash a beef or bring some peace on the street. And obviously some of them have the capacity to do the opposite, but I wanted to be working with people who are in custody, even people who might be in custody for the rest of their lives, because a lot of them have profoundly changed and a lot of them do want to make things better. They do want to have, they want to have more peace. Let me finally just say this, I think it was I think it was Latonya. By the way, Latonya, usually you have a much nicer tie than me. I'm kind of missing it here, but we'll get past that. I think it was T who was talking about how she appreciated that the juvenile lifers had come out. And I mean, to be honest, what she's saying is you've been so law abiding. You have not been arrested. You have not gone on bank robbery sprees. You have done so much for people's perception of what criminal justice should be. Because let's not forget, you were supposed to be monsters. You were supposed to be beasts. You were supposed to be people who had to die in jail because we couldn't let you out for a minute. And yet you came out and look what you are. Look how much you've done. There's next to no crime. You're probably safer than an average group of people on the street. And I'm not saying that just to be hopeful. I've seen the numbers. You're probably safer than an average number of people on the street. So that to me is a real reflection of why it's important to go into custody, why it's important to have a connection between prosecutors and people who are in custody, because I think it can help us all to work together to get to a better place.
Yeah, thank you. This is a question for all the panelists, so anyone can answer it. There are a number of folks on this call who are involved in higher education. And in light of that, what might be the role of higher education and reimagining justice? Anyone can take that question from the panelists.
I'll jump on there. I think there's a number of ways that I very much support the Inside Out program. I'm a big believer in it. I think, the idea of proximity, of being around spaces and individuals that are othered. I think there was a message in the chat about the language we use when we're talking about people and groups of people, and I think that's important. Mr. Krasner pointed out earlier today that, we need to get away from the blanket kind of referring to groups all in one pocket and saying all folks are this way. And it's easy get caught up, I think, in the system, and to think that way yourself. I myself have, said things in blatant stance that I've later regretted, because we're not all a certain kind of way. And I think when we see the individuality that exists for each person, and we can recognize that in ourselves as well, we're able to kind of move through space in a very different way. When we can stop othering based on financial status or our backgrounds and the lived experiences that we've had, when we can stop this idea of these cookie cutter responses, then I think we can see a very different future, and we can see the commonality that we all share. And when there's an idea that prison walls are built as much to keep people out as they are to keep people in. And when you start breaking down those walls, and not necessarily physically, but in cases, right? When you start breaking down those walls and you start showing that we're all human beings, we all have very similar needs and wants in life. And when you can start recognizing those, then we can start moving forward in a very different way. That's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Anyone else want to briefly say something about that, the role of higher education and reimagining justice?
I just want to briefly honestly think Temple University and the Inside Out program, that while I was incarcerated, I seen Temple University students come in, sit down with us. I learned about what policy was, just not what the elements of the crime, but what policy was. And they brought Suzanne Burton from California, an amazing criminal justice activist, in to RCF, Riverside Correctional Facility, which was the female prison in Philadelphia at that time. And I sat next to an individual that I seen, and she told our story. She signed my book, and she signed the book that she wrote, which is an autobiography. Talk about that the name of it is Becoming Miss Burton. And she gave me so much inspiration. She gave me so much hope. And then seeing those law students, I was almost jealous, because I'm like, I should be in this class next to y'all, not in the prison, but outside of it. And it gave me the aptitude to really learn what Lexus Nuisance was, to go back to that law library and not create a calendar, but really argue the 160 rule. Why am I still held in custody if I haven't been brought up for trial? So I just want to say thank you to Temple University for, bringing individuals that was impacted, but also is driving solutions, that's driving change. And then showing us exactly how do we integrate within, like, how do we be a part of with this discussion? How do we just not be a spectator or a victim, but how can we really be able to give what we have for the better cause of our community, our family, and everybody else? So I think that program, Inside Out, really is what changed my life, to understand that we have to understand that the pen is mightier than the sword, and there's different ways that we can go about it, and how can we utilize our talent in the most positive way, in the most positive outcome and direction, so that we don't have to just conform to that narrative of a group, quote unquote, what Frederick Douglass said. When we, if we talk about the parallels to slavery and mass incarceration at this time, we don't want to feel like groups. We want to be educated, and we want to bring forth this data that's hidden within our community, so people can really act with accuracy and how to address these issues, and standing in solidarity against the harm that's being perpetuated in the most vulnerable communities. So I just want to say thank you, Temple University, and all the professors out there that's willing to understand, relate, uplift, and amplify the voices of those that's firmly impacted. Thank you, John Pace. Thank you, Connie. Thank you, everyone that laid the foundation for this right here. Thank you.
Thank you, Latonya. And Ghani's going to be the last one, and then we'll have a brief go around for everyone to say, last words. Ghani, go ahead.
Yeah, just on the piece of, higher education in prison, aside from the sense of accomplishment that it gives a person and how it allows someone to just channel their energies into something positive, because no matter what book we could read books on, building self-esteem and books on transformation, and we can take workshops on that. But until you do something that you can feel proud of, until your accomplishments, right? It's your accomplishments that help transform you. But beyond that, aside from, say, getting a degree in prison, we can reimagine higher education itself in prison. There's no reason, for instance, out of, say, 28 to 30 prisons, or however amount of prisons exist in the state of Pennsylvania, as an example, that only one prison has a college program, which was great afford at the time with Villanova, now, well, Phoenix, and that's even shut down because of the DOC's and the state's response to COVID-19. But even in those prisons, Greater Fort and then Phoenix, which had the capacity to hold anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 people, there were only about 25 people, 30 people on the college roster. You dig what I'm saying? That's unacceptable. And people in prison are learning things that's not going to translate into actually gainful kind of careers in this new techno-driven, service-oriented world. And so we're going to have to begin to reimagine how we can turn these prisons, right, or these institutions, until we dismantle them and abolish them altogether, however long that's going to take, we can at least turn them into institutions of learning, right, and institutions of transformation. With MOOCs, massive open online courses, for instance, the technology exists inside the prisons. People have access to tablets. They have flat screen TVs that can accommodate the technology. Can you imagine young people in prison, instead of spending their days playing basketball or sitting at the table out on the blocks, playing poker, or with COVID-19, they're locked in the cells, but while they're locked in the cells, they're sitting on their bunks, scrolling through college courses. You understand what I'm saying? And then you have young people with these college exchange programs coming in and tutoring them. And so and it's cheap. It doesn't cost anything because MOOCs is cheap. It's up and running already. And you do four things. Instead of throwing billions and billions of dollars into the bottomless pit of mass human caging, you're also, teaching people skills, giving them new skills that's transformative, right? And that can have them be useful and contributing members to their society. You can have college students coming in and actually getting hands-on real issues, tutoring people. And then you also require the staff, the prison staff, to take these courses so that they can begin to imagine a life beyond just turning keys on people and locking them in their cells and so on. And so we have to begin to reimagine higher learning, with STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and medicine, and make it on mass education over mass incarceration, not just a college program in one prison, but a college program in any prison. And that's how we could begin to really start visualizing, perhaps, an end to this scenario.
Thank you, Ghani. And I'm sorry, we are very tight on time. And so I'm just going to say a few words, just simply say how I appreciate this discussion in terms of really looking at, I think one of the things that came out of it, for me, and I think I'm glad that we got to talk about it a little bit about change, how change sometimes, comes with resistance, and yet and still how you have to still be persistent, despite those resistance. And so I'm thankful that we got the opportunity to really talk about that. And, I think hopefully it makes us better in terms of perhaps down the line, because we know that, we're going to continue to face these particular resistance. And so I'm thankful that we got the opportunity to talk about it. And I thank all of y'all for participating in this conversation. I'm going to turn it over to Lori at this time.
Can I say one thing?
I think we really, Latonya, we are really out of time, really. That's why we were going to let everybody go say a final word, but the time is right there.
I just wanted to amplify the work that me and Ghani is doing with the men that's currently serving life without parole in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is one of the only states that life without parole is life. And these men, we are putting together a debate in a moderation. They're going to argue the unconstitutionality, how it's unconstitutional for them to be serving life without parole. I want everyone to please go to Above All Odds, tap in with Ghani, please tap in with me. Let's really bring these voices to the light. Like, these men have worked in the law library countlessly. There's no computers. They're still typing and carbon printing things. So I just really want people to really hear how people are fighting for their lives, but also amplifying and challenging a constitution that is death by incarceration in Pennsylvania currently. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Latonya. So we could go on and on. Obviously, this is just kind of a really amazing conversation and has gone in so many wonderful directions. And it's really raised a lot of questions for me, for sure. We obviously want to thank lots of people, just very quickly. The folks from Philly DA who worked with us to make this event possible, especially Ted and Javi. I personally want to thank the Inside Out Center, the staff of the Inside Out Center, who always go above and beyond. It's really just an awesome group of people to work with. And of course, huge appreciation to the panelists, Trevor, Ghani, Latonya, Ted, and of course, Larry Krasner, who has been, I'm going to say it this way, changing the criminal justice system in Philadelphia, one policy, one case, one person at a time. So thanks to everybody. And by the way, we'll also share more materials via the chat. And what we would ask people to do is kind of on your way out. This is what we often do is in Inside Out, is just share a thought or two, and it would have to be by chat, about or an insight, something that you're going to be taking with you. So thank you all for just a really powerful and amazing discussion. Take care.